Okay. So you then make that leap in a sense into, well, let's find out addiction from looking at people, talking to people, and looking at treatment, and that and how did that get you talking about recovery as well? So what was the difference between working in the lab and then working with people? What was that like for you?
Okay, well, so I'm thinking, and when I was working in neuroscience, I was always thinking behavior in the clinic. A lot of neuroscientists aren't thinking in that sort of way. I remember one of my students in Sweden once saying to me, David, it's all in the synapse. He's now a very, very successful medical doctor. But to me, I was always thinking behavior. And then it's very reductionist, very simple. And then I went, so you've got to think of, here was this university professor going into the community, and from middle-class background, living in a nice house on the Gower Peninsula, and going and meeting people whose lives had been ravaged, not just by drugs, but by all the other problems in their lives. And that was quite a shock at one level to me, but at another level, it sort of started to build a passion inside me. I was looking at what real life was about. And this wasn't about, as some neuroscientists would tell you, people chasing reward. No. I mean, I got to see that the drug problem was part of a much wider problem. People who were homeless, they'd lost their family, their friends, they had no money. We didn't talk a lot about trauma in those days, but clearly some of those people had been abused. And heroin is one of the best painkillers. In fact, it's probably used more than any other drug in hospitals, although it's not called heroin, for physical pain. So for some people, it's killing psychological pain. So suddenly I began to realize that for addiction itself is part of a wider thing. That's the first thing. It's not chasing reward. It's often killing pain, but it's a lot more multifaceted than that. So straight away, I saw this need for a holistic approach. It wasn't all about biology. It was as much about social and relationships and that sort of thing.
And where did you see
this? I saw very early. Oh, sorry, go on.
Where did you see this? Were you, what project were you in within?
Okay, so I'm in a treatment agency called West Glamorgan Council on Drug and Alcohol Abuse at the time. It was, the primary treatment program was primarily based on 12-step Minnesota model. But it was much more multifaceted than that. People would come into primary treatment and they might go off into harm reduction, or they might go to the primary treatment program, or they might go to something called Domino, which was development and motivation and new outlooks, which was doing gardening, computers, fitness, walk,
so
to bring people out of isolation.
Okay. And that's when you're starting to encounter the treatment professionals and the clients of that service and started to get to know them. What did you see tell me a little bit about, I guess it's very different to what you were doing before. How did you encounter recovery within that? What did you said?
Well, I guess the first thing I knew about recovery was my very good friend Keith Morgan, or as we call him, Keith the Carrot. And Keith ran Domino. He was a rock musician, brilliant rock musician, and he was in recovery. And he explained to me that he'd had a serious problem with alcohol. Just the stories of what he got up to were incredible. And he went to rehab in Resyrken in West Wales, and eventually joined WGCADA, that's the abbreviation, and eventually became a practitioner. And so through him, and then through some others, a couple of the counsellors, Lawrence and Fred, who both passed away now, were in recovery as well. And when they talked about their life, it wasn't just drugs, that their life was damaged in many ways.
Yeah.
And they talked about the path they had to take, how much repair, I guess, they had to do on their lives to get to where they were.
Yeah.
And they had this incredible passion. That's one of the things which most engaged me, I guess, is there were these people who had been through so much.
Yeah.
And then were determined to help people. And from the outcomes I could see and the way of talking to the clients, they were doing something. This wasn't what I later saw in other treatment services and read about. It seemed to be working with people. So that was my first touching of recovery, was with practitioners who were in recovery themselves.
Right.
So obviously, when I first started talking to clients, and I'd be talking to some who were literally just there, or maybe they'd been a few weeks in Domino and we were doing gardening together, or I would catch them after they'd been in their counseling session or something. They would have been much, they're on the beginning of their journey.
Yeah, yeah.
And one of those people I've actually now known 20 years of her recovery. She's 20 years in recovery, and we'll talk about her later. She taught me a lot. So I was getting it from both sides, the practitioners, the clients. So I was getting to see what recovery was about, but I was also starting to see the elements of what treatment was.